into the sort of the normal rhythm of the year. I have a friend that used to say that the way that he handled life was to establish a rut and then move in and furnish it. And it's not really my way of doing things, but after the season of like there's this going on and that going on and this day is off and there's just so much going on, I'm always happy to be like, so every January we do what I call back to basics. So it really refers to looking at what are the fundamentals of the spiritual philosophy that we espouse here at HeartSpace. And this will be year 8, year 7?
7.
This will be year 7. And it's like 7. So the challenge is, what do you do with something 7 years running so that it's not stale? And the founder of our philosophy is a fellow by the name of Ernest Holmes, which most of you all know, and he wrote this textbook called The Science of Mind and Spirit, and the first 4 chapters are where he essentially lays down what it is that we attempt to practice and attempt to embrace as a way of looking at ourselves in the world. And the first 4 chapters are the thing itself, the way it works, what it does, and how to use it. And then he does this tremendous download of what I would call the perennial philosophy, or sort of these essential ideas about the divine that have presenced themselves down through the ages. But he uses his own language. And for his time, which this was the early 1920s, that language was revolutionary. And now that language is archaic. Right? It's understandable, but it's jargony and funny, weird. So what I'm going to try to do this month to keep it fresh for myself is attempt to do every single talk this month without the use of jargon. Now, I'm not going to necessarily alter quotes that I use, but I'm going to use everyday language. So the first thing that I want to start with is something that I already said, but I want to give you a way to encapsulate that. And this is actually a Sufi saying. In all of his bestsellers, the divine has told the truth, custom tailored to the comprehension of the times. One more time. In all of his bestsellers, the divine has told the truth, custom tailored to the comprehension of the times. Right? So what's beautiful about that is it gives us a hint that the truth is forever being revealed. Right? The truth wasn't revealed in the Hebrew Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or the New Testament, the Christian Bible, and then that was it. Now we're just going to spend the rest of our time looking backward and interpreting it. The truth is being revealed all the time. When we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we can align ourselves with that. And that's really good news, because some of those truths are not true for me. And I think some of them were misinterpreted. But mostly I think that for me, because I'm sort of a doubter by nature, I was having a conversation with somebody on the phone last night, and I was joking with her that I'm not a Seventh-day Adventist, I'm a Seventh-day atheist. So like about every 7 days I wake up with an overwhelming doubt. And then I sit back and I think about it and I contemplate it, and I remember that ultimately the decision, the starting point about God or the divine or spirit or whatever limited language we want to wrap around this thing, is you start out with a fundamental assumption that it's all an accident, or there's a bigger purpose, a bigger intelligence, a bigger, not plan. Because if there was a plan, we'd have to go backward and look to see where we could find the plan so we could kind of find out what's going on. But there's a pattern. And so every day the decision is it all random? Is it all like an accident of matter that we find ourselves awake and able to love and live and direct and find purpose? Or is it just like, the Big Bang happened and eventually consciousness got squirted out of matter? That's fundamentally what it comes down to. I mean, all of philosophy, all of spirituality, or all of religion or theology is really us attempting to make sense of a handful of questions, and the fundamental starting point is something or nothing. Pattern or chaos. How am I doing with the jargon? Have I slipped? Okay. All right. So I referred to I mentioned the fact that religion, philosophy attempt to answer some fundamental questions about our own existence. And I'm going to tell you what those questions are, although I'm not going to address them all today. I'm going to address them all this month. And these are like literally out of a textbook on theology. Where the author says every theology has to answer these questions. Okay, so the first question is, what is the nature of God or ultimate reality? Second, what is the nature of humankind? Third, what is the nature of the world? Fourth, where did we come from? Fifth, to where are we ultimately going? Sixth, how do we access or experience ultimate reality? And the most challenging one, number 7, why does suffering exist? So how do we be a bestseller in our time and answer some of these questions in a way that's completely accessible? Sometimes the easiest way to understand things is to understand what they're not. So remember it like in high school, and I don't know when they started, maybe it was elementary school, where they said compare and contrast the following topics. Sometimes it's easier to understand what it is we teach by comparing it to what we don't. And the starting point for what we diverge from, say, in Christianity, because if you grew up in this country, you grew up immersed in a Judeo-Christian understanding. Whether or not your parents were practicing, whether or not you had any formal religious training, that's what we grow up in. So we begin to make assumptions about things when they're not actually true. In fact, I think most people that leave any kind of spiritual path, I've come to understand they do what I did. They throw the baby out with the bathwater. See, I think we all kind of get it, like deep down, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Right? So there's this deep intuition that there's something as opposed to nothing. And yet all of this stuff that gets wrapped around it. I mean, by the time I was 12, I was smoking a joint going, this stuff doesn't make any sense at all. God is love, and yet God did this? What? Right? So we're like, no, God doesn't make sense. Well, it's just the wrapping. But I threw the baby out with the bathwater. I was like, no, I'm an atheist. I was an atheist by the time I was 13. That was the last time I overachieved. Right? So what we have to do is take the starting point in our culture, which is Judeo-Christianity, and say, okay, instead of this, we believe this. Ernest Holmes says, now this is where I get to use jargon. The study of the science of mind is a study of first cause, spirit, mind, or that invisible essence, that ultimate stuff and intelligence from which everything comes. The power back of creation, the thing itself. First cause, spirit, mind, intelligence. These are all words that Ernest Holmes used, and the way that I translate them is stuff you can't see. That's a bunch of stuff you can't see. True? You can see the results of it. Like if you encounter someone, say Adlika, who's a very bright woman. She speaks, she works, she does these things, and we can see how intelligent she is. But it's not by looking in her ear, right? So we see the results of the invisible thing. So what Ernest Holmes says is that we are in the business of understanding what that invisible thing is, which of course is that first theological question: what's the nature of ultimate reality? Handful of things I'd like to remind you about. In Judeo-Christianity, there's a divine being, and up here and back there, and we are down here and right now. And because some guy and woman a long, long time ago, like, had a mistake conversation with a snake, and some other stuff happened, they made a mistake and we're paying for it. So this world that we live in is imperfect. And some otherly realm where the divine dwells is perfect. And we spend our time trying to follow some rules or guesstimate what it is that the divine expects of us so that we can defer gratification and get a payoff at the end of the race. Whew, that's terrible. I'm such an alcoholic. I've never delayed gratification in my life. I mean, there is like, that just doesn't happen for me. The way that we look at it is that invisible thing through a process, we're going to call it the creative process, actually gave birth to the whole world. So we have this invisible thing that goes through a process that becomes visible. And so if this thing is perfect, not meaning the way that I take up the word perfect is not without error, it means excluding nothing. So if this all that we can't see goes through a creative process to become everything we can see, touch, feel, taste, smell, and experience, it includes everything and everyone. So it doesn't matter if you say you're an atheist, say you're a Christian, say you're a Hindu, say you're a Muslim. None of those things matter. Because we all came from the same place, which is perfect wholeness. And we are all manifestations, let's say. Oh, that's a jargon word. Who's got a better word? Outpouring, outcome. The visible, visible fabulousness of the invisible thing. And I want to stop for just a second because, we spend our entire spiritual journey, maybe not entirely, but most of our spiritual journey trying to remember that. That no matter what has happened to you, no matter the kind of abuse, the perfect upbringing, the mistaken upbringing, no matter any of that, you come from wholeness, and you are whole. And so am I. And that's like, I had a teacher who used to say the journey from the head to the heart was the longest. And it's just remembering we're whole. So the thing itself, the ultimate reality, is this unseen wholeness that through some creative process becomes the fabulousness of creation itself. Now, another way that we want to define ultimate reality is without equal, or without a second power. Like, so we have a power for good. In Christianity, we have a power for good and a power for not good. In the science of mind and spirit and new thought in general, there is no power for not good. Because does that make sense to you? Did it ever make sense to you? It didn't make sense to me. I was really relieved to see that I could actually have a faith practice that didn't involve an opposite to God. So there's not two powers, one power. Because a power that is whole, a power that is that contains everything within itself, brooks no opposite. Now you can have polarities within a whole. So you can have experiences that you label good or bad or desirable or not desirable. Or any kind of polarity, male, female, sad, happy. The whole is big enough to contain polar opposites. But that doesn't affect the whole. Does that make sense? Good. How am I doing with jargon? Okay, good. I had a teacher that said that a great way to think about this is you can turn on a light, but you can't turn on the darkness. But when you turn off the light, there's an absence of it. Right? So you can have wars and famines and hunger and hatred and all of those things. And that doesn't affect the ultimate reality that is the divine. But it might show how deeply we can forget where we came from. Okay, a couple of gimmies here. God doesn't have a gender, right? That's just, In Judeo-Christian scripture, God is generally referred to in the masculine. You can say he, she, it, they. You can never use a pronoun because it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, come on. I don't even know why I brought it up. There is a reason I brought it up. Because when we use the masculine pronoun for God, a lot of the time, how do I explain this? I'm a little long-winded today. Okay, so like you could kind of be bebopping along, and then you smell something like somebody's shampoo or perfume or cologne, or you cut grass, and it brings to mind some former experience. The reason we have to be really careful using personal pronouns, or he especially, when we're talking about the divine, because the use of the word can bring up former images of what it means. Right? So I'm teaching a foundations class. That's the class we all get started with, and it starts in a couple of weeks. And when I took that class, they were like, don't say he. God is not a he. And so you really had to police your language, because otherwise you'd browbeat. And I don't do that when people start foundations, but I do remind them that you want to be careful using that word, because it might bring that baggage with it. But it's not wrong to say he or she or it or they. I guess that's why I brought it up. Okay. So right along those lines, if God is not a being, but is this wholeness, we can say that God is not being, but the ground of being itself. So it is the ground from which everything arises. Everything is born, everything emerges, including you. Including the guy you don't like at work. What?
I was waiting for it.
What did the peanut gallery say?
44.
I didn't say that. I don't have a resolution, but I'm trying to be well behaved.
I don't have that resolution.
All right. The nature of ultimate reality is love. And by love, I don't mean, and Ernest Holmes did not mean, a warm, fuzzy feeling. Although that's part of it, I think. Right? When I long to experience not the person of the divine, but the presence of the divine, I do associate that with a feeling of connection and warmth and care. But what Ernest Holmes meant when he said love is that this invisible thing that is ultimate reality, whose nature is love, means that it gives of itself through that creative process into form continually and unstoppably. Self-givingness of spirit. Right? So where this becomes interesting, and I'm going to cover this I think in week 3 or something, is when I say, okay, if my job is to to moment. If my job is to imagine the most beautiful invisible and then be its representative or be its visible form, then that invisible, the way that I imagine it, is the way that I should approach living. And where that becomes important for me is, what is my job? What is my purpose here? Not what's like the particulars. Are you a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian-chief, a butcher, baker, candlestick maker? But what are you doing while you're doing what you're doing? That's the question. So what does it mean for me to be practicing self-givingness? What does that mean for you to practice self-givingness? The relief in this is, if I'm going to be an emissary of the divine, I should be loving. But I don't always feel loving. So when I define love as the self-givingness, then I can be self-giving and be in a bad mood. This is big. I mean, I'm approaching it very lightly, but this is a big point. And the reason it's a big point is because no matter how far down the path, how far wide we can get on the spiritual path, how perfect a reflection we become of, or a personification of the invisible, we are going to be human. And we're going to have bad days. And we are going to make mistakes, and we are going to grow, and we are going to be eternally self-giving imperfectly. And it takes a lot of pressure off when I don't imagine this big, beautiful, unseen, ultimate reality that includes and transcends everything, and then assume that to be like that, or to invite that into my being, or to live that in my life, that I then have to do it flawlessly, or I'm failing. So the last thing I want to say about the thing itself today, and we got some jargon warning, because this is an Ernest Holmes quote. The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul, and all instinctively feel this. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom which the soul craves. So the final thing to remember about this is I can choose when I'm awake to do it, right? Because we were already born. To be born again means to come to become aware. So I can make a choice from moment to moment when I'm awake to it to be God or be not God. So every time I come aware, I can make a choice. Do I want to do the thing that looks the most like self-givingness? Or am I going to take a break from that? And that's the divine plan. Freedom. To choose. I believe I've reached the end of all I'm going to say about this. So I'm going to, oh yeah, Brad, I love you. So the place to start the year, the thing to start with, is to remember that nothing changes where you came from. Nothing changes where you return to. And that to awaken to the divine, to become the imperfect reflection of perfection, is a moment-by-moment choice. Yeah, let's pray. So this moment, starting this new year, I am inviting for myself and for all who are willing, inviting an awareness of this ultimate reality. And when I step into that ultimate reality, knowing that there is nothing outside of it, that it is infinite and infinitely present, I can actually take a big old deep breath. For in this moment, just right now, as I am, who I am, in my imperfect perfection, is enough. And so as I feel the weight of the world and the weight of politics and the weight of jobs and whatever else troubles my soul or troubles my personality, I can sink into this awareness of the indwelling presence that is that ultimate reality. And as I release responsibility for everything, I can pick up responsibility for the only thing that's mine, and that is choice. The way that I choose to live my life, the way that I choose to see others, the way that I choose to frame struggle. The choices of my time and my life. That's freedom. That is freedom for me. And so I begin this year, 2019, and then I invite everyone to begin this year. Remembering that the true power we have is with us all the time. It's always been there. It can never be corrupted or taken. And the appearance of otherwise just oh, it just fades into the nothingness, to the mistaken thoughts from which it came. Allowing us to begin the year awake and aware and consciously turning our light on. So for the remembrance of this and this powerful teaching of the science of mind and spirit, and all who came before and taught and practiced, I say thank you. To all the beauty and the goodness and the love and light that is yet to be, I say you are welcome here. And I see that it's good, and it's very good. And so it is.